Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. We are glad to have you. I am Kelly Birmingham. This podcast is a retrospective look across my 25 plus, now like 28-year career working with children and adults on the autism spectrum. We're glad you found us. As always, I have my partner in crime, Jen Lucero, mother to Dylan and Ethan. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Kelly.
How are you doing?
Good.
So this topic is fun, something we both have experienced
Yes.
firsthand. We're talking autism and divorce.
hmm
In researching this, I was trying to find anyone else had done a podcast on this topic, and I didn't find one.
Really?
Maybe
Wow. That's surprising because the rates are so high. Yeah.
none of the ABA podcasts that I could see talk about it. And I was
hmm
just like, heck yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think
So
it's smart.
right? Since we both know it firsthand.
hmm
So before we get going, we always have to give our shout out to our sponsor, SitePro. If you haven't been to SitePro, log on. They give a range of engaging and practical continuing education courses developed by BCBAs for BCBAs, and you can find them at sitepro.com. All of our podcasts are on their website for free. BCBAs listening can get free CEUs, hearing engaging topics like divorce and autism. And we also, you and I are doing a live event with them November 17th that will also be recorded about the real holiday tips and autism.
Yeah, that would be good. Perfect timing.
I know. So, all right, divorce. I'm not shy to disclose I have been divorced. I remarried someone who has a daughter on the spectrum. I've watched the impact of my stepdaughter trying to figure out how to have a stepmom. It was ugly many times. Today, actually, I can share a beautiful story. What am I, 14 years into this? And I have a real beautiful story I'm happy to share. You yourself, divorced,
Yes.
son on the autism spectrum.
Yep. And two kids.
I was
So,
with you through that.
yes, we both survived. And we're both like good people now. So, yeah.
It's for the better, right? That's why I got rid of McKinnon. Lots of people knew me as Kelly McKinnon, like a lot of people for a very long time. And people said, why would you change your name? And I said, because I don't ever want to be associated with that man. He's a shady dude. So, all right, I did some research and I found an article. It was published in 2011. I couldn't find, there's mixed data out there. This one was an actual sort of like research article, and it was in the National Library of Medicine. And it said parents of children with autism or ASD had a higher rate of divorce than the comparison group of families without children on the autism spectrum. The data is mixed on it out there, if I'm being honest. I've seen different things. This data said 23.5% of families on autism got divorced versus the national average of 13.8%. Sounds right to me. I got to tell you, I've worked with thousands of children in my career. Whole bunch of their parents got divorced during.
Yeah, I would think it would be higher, but I mean, I guess it could also be on the time range, I think people with older kids, like my, son, like I know a lot of people that were divorced at that time, but maybe people are trying to stick it out, like, and this day and age.
Well, it's interesting because when a lot of it depended on the age of family members and age that people got married and how soon they had children. So I found some data that showed that families that were younger when they got married and had a child quicker in their marriage, who then were diagnosed with autism, those families were more likely to get divorced. Yeah, that's you. That's my husband. 100% my husband.
And yeah, because I mean, I got married when I was 27 and got pregnant pretty quickly. Had Dylan at 28. And yeah, so I had him kind of right away. So I consider that pretty young, you know?
Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
statistics. It was under
Hmm.
30. It
Hmm.
was people married under 30, and a child within the first 2 years,
Yep. Yep.
um, and diagnosis of autism, higher rates of divorce than other families. Makes sense, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, all right, I'm going to walk through some stuff and you can tell me. I promised my husband Bill I wouldn't throw too much about his prior marriage under the bus, so I won't do that out of respect for him
Yeah.
and Melanie. But I
Yeah.
will give the perspective while we're going through this of what it's like to try to be a step parent to a child on the
Hmm.
spectrum, which was a rude awakening for me because I'm a BCBA. Frankly, I have the experience where most children and families love me. Like
Hmm.
all my clients loved me. I was very successful. It was a whole friggin' different ball game trying to do it for my own child. And that
Hmm.
has a lot to do with what launched this podcast, frankly, because I was like, wait a minute, it's the whole emotional component, the guilt involved of how you feel raising a child on autism, which we've done podcasts on before. It's a thing.
Definitely. Definitely.
So it may be not effective at all. And frankly, well, we'll get into some of those things, but a couple of things that there are also statistics that talked about this, the divorce rates in these situations were higher in minority groups as well, right?
Hmm.
No surprise. Also had to do with, no surprise, severity of the autism,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And disagreements around the diagnosis of autism.
Hmm.
Sound familiar?
Yes.
That was my husband's scenario too.
Hmm.
I a lot in my over the years in my practice families um not agreeing both on the diagnosis and the strategies to use for the
Hmm.
diagnosis.
Yeah.
So the reason I think this is important is because there's like, oh, I should know the number, 60,000 something BCBAs right now. I became a BCBA in 2003. I'm the 1,358 BCBA ever. There are now
OG.
OG. There's about 60,000 plus of them. But do
Hmm.
you know nearly 5%, sorry, over 50% of those have only been certified for 5 years. And the demographics actually talk about their ages. 20% of BCBAs are between the age of 18 and 24. That's super young, right?
Yeah.
And then 45% are under the 34 years old. And so is that important? Not in a lot of ways, but if you're thinking divorce and life experience, I wonder how
Yeah.
many of those BCBAs have been married and had, gone through some
Children.
of these,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
had children, know what it's like. So to me, that feels like all the reasons to do this podcast. So let's get into
Yeah.
strategies and feelings. I As always, Jen, you graciously share a lot about your life. Feel free to share what you feel comfortable and don't share what
Hmm.
you don't feel comfortable. But um, divorce is painful.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Do you want to,
Yeah.
I mean, how old was Dylan? I remember, but for our audience, how old was
Yeah.
Dylan when you got divorced? And talk about, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, what that was like for you guys.
So my kids were my youngest, Ethan, is 6 and Dylan was 8
Wow.
when it all went down.
And
And
they're how old now? So our audience can know.
so Ethan just turned 22 yesterday,
Oh my God.
and Dylan is turning 24 next month
Yep.
in December. So it's been quite a long
Yeah.
time, but always still painful, even when you're happy now, it's always life altering. I think it was extra hard for me too because I'm an only child, and my parents got married super young, and they've been married forever, like
They have.
53 years, and have lived in the same house since I was 6 months old. And they actually still like each other and stuff. And so, that's what I grew up with. So
Yeah.
there was always kind of like this, very high standard, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, when, you know, we're breaking up and getting divorced, like first of all, it's like hard enough and devastating as it is, but when you have a child with autism, Dylan at the time, he was considered moderate to severe. That was a time frame in his life when he was already really struggling. He
That was a
was
hard time for him.
he was
Mhm.
extremely, yeah, anxious. He had a lot of aggression and
Mhm.
tantrums at that point anyways. So it was so confusing, like to, me just in general, but to everybody else, that, it was my main goal at that point was just trying to keep it together, the best I could to, support the boys and get them through it, but not ever experiencing or like any of that. You know what I mean? I never saw that really around me much. Like most of my family or people I knew were still married. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just wasn't exposed much, even myself, to divorce. And so, it was like, how do I deal and how do I support the kids? And I think it was a combo. It was very hard because, it was very hard to know because I've always known that Dylan is very like even though at that point he was very limited verbally with
Yep.
communication, but he retains everything. And
Mhm.
I absolutely knew by the way he was responding and reacting to things that he knew exactly what was going on.
Yep.
And he was very upset about it. And like then he started acting out even more. So it
Yep.
was hard. And yet you have this younger, typical child that like people perceive that, oh, it's probably even harder on him because he understands everything and blah blah blah. But I think it was equally but different, like,
Yeah.
very traumatic for both of them. So, but we made it through.
I remember you asking me. I remember you were like, "How do I tell him? What do I do?" And,
Mm-hmm.
at that time, Dylan was really struggling and he struggled to communicate. And you and I always knew he understood everything. Not everyone agreed with that,
Mm-hmm.
but we always knew that.
Yeah.
And so if I recall, like we found a couple books.
Mm-hmm.
You just started telling him. Didn't you like
Mm-hmm.
change some pictures? If do I have that right? Did you like take
Yeah, we changed pictures around.
yeah.
We did social stories.
Yeah, like
We
you took
created
down
stuff.
family pictures, didn't you? And like just put
Yeah,
pictures of them?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, stuff like that. Um, I I always tried to though be respectful and like want them to also like maintain a positive relationship with their dad. I tried
Yeah.
not to be a person that said bad things, like I never did that, I never would.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a real big struggle for them. I think the main thing, which Dawn is super fixated at that time in general too, was like he is like so reliant on routine,
Yep.
schedule,
Yep.
consistency, and anything that diverted from that in any way. Anyways, just something simple in his daily life, like he would lose it. So like to have such a huge situation happening, and then also at the point where luckily we ended up staying in the same house. We're actually still here.
Yep.
But even, he loves his room, he loves his bed. But even having, not to say like they didn't want to go see their dad or something, but just the change of, okay, like now on this weekend, you're going to go, to your dad's and stay somewhere else. Like, for a child with autism, like, it just it took a lot of like coaching,
Yeah.
and a lot of strategies, and he got used to it,
You
but
know,
it's definitely hard.
yeah. Oh, I remember he'd throw pictures and scream and yell
Oh
and
yeah, that's
I
the
was
wind. That was the time I got my windshield kicked in,
that's
my
right.
car.
That's
That
right.
was the year the Christmas tree went flying across the
That's
house,
oh my
like,
gosh,
and
that's
broke
right.
half the ornaments. Yeah, that was a wild year.
That was the year. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, some of the reasons it talked more about reasons why families with autism are under more stress, which might also contribute to divorce. This rings true. The symptoms of autism, like the inability to communicate, how they respond when change in routine, like that's stressful enough, then add a divorce to it, right? Resources, my God, it costs so much to have a child on the autism spectrum,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And the people and concerns about their long-term care, like you're divorced, who's going to take care of them when they're old,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh yeah. There's definitely a lot of pressure. I mean, you know, there definitely Dylan didn't get diagnosed till he was 4, and
Which blows me
we
away because it was so obvious.
yeah, so we knew, I think, for about 2 years, and we're doing therapies and trying to get it
Yep.
done. But I think part
That
like,
was 20 years ago.
I knew the stress level like really hit when, even though we knew, when you go in and they just do this list of, at the time, that's really what they thought, of like, here's the big picture of a 4-year-old, and you have a 2-year-old also, right?
Yep.
And you're still pretty newly married. Like, we're
Yep.
only 5, like, at that point, like, just over 5 years, 6 years in. And, and they just give you, honestly, like a terrible, like, outcome diagnosis for
Hmm.
your child's rest of their life. And like, part of you is like, okay, like this, I have a life sentence myself now,
Hmm.
so like, and it's not in defense of anybody. It just like, of course, that, like, how could that not put strain on anybody's relationship, you
Right.
know?
Uh,
So,
so
and things are very different now than they were, then. I mean,
yeah,
as
it's 20 years
even just
ago.
that, yeah, the accessibility and like what was there. And like you said, like a lot of stuff you had to pay out of pocket at
All
the
out of
time if
pocket.
you were going to do it. And yeah, and then, I think that's when things come out, just like in general, of like, priorities of like, you know, of course, like when you're married, like there, that's when things come out of like, what are your priorities as opposed to, other people's, or the blame game of like either way, like,
Yeah.
like you said, the diagnosis, or like, or the way you're responding to it. Are you triggering behaviors? Are you
Mhm.
reacting well to, so it's kind of, it's sad because it is hard. I've seen it with many people. So, and some people stick it out, and some people, can't hang. And but in the long run, if that's how it's going to be, it's, better for everybody. But it's not fun when you're going through it.
Well, it's funny. I found this website that was done by a special ed lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't name their name because I don't want to, I'm not endorsing it in any way, but when I was doing my
Mm-hmm.
research, I'm like, this is so funny because the lawyer was basically saying, if you have a child with special needs and you're getting divorced, this is the shit you need to be doing if you're going to make sure your child's doing okay. And I'll go
Mm-hmm.
through it because it's exactly all the stuff you've just said. But when you're
Mm-hmm.
going through a divorce, how the hell do you manage this? Right. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
my husband's divorce was nasty too. I wasn't around, I wasn't involved. I met him years later, but it was nasty, had a lot to do with diagnose and how to treat it. And they did not co-parent well at
Mm-hmm.
all. And in the beginning, I think they kind of did, but as they got older, my husband ended up raising Melanie from the time she was 13 on,
Mm-hmm.
and had some contact with her mom, but not a lot. It's improved. That relationship is improved now, but there's no communication. So imagine when the two parents will barely speak to each other. How do you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I, even as a BCBA, I came into the situation and I'm like, well, I'm going to get us all talking. And, I know we've got to all be doing the same thing and be consistent. And I'll go through this list and we'll chuckle over how hard it is. But that did not happen. And it's very difficult to raise a child. And you experience a little bit of this when you're doing things differently. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say what I noticed over the years is kids on the autism spectrum can adapt and they get really good about, I'm going to use the word compartmentalize, but
Mm-hmm.
like once they get their routines in each scenario, like one home to another, if those routines remain the same, even if they're different,
Mm-hmm.
they'll do okay. It might not be optimal, but I've seen that. Like Dylan does that, I think.
Yeah, he does fine. And I mean, one good thing is actually, strangely, when we did get divorced, I feel like we actually were kind of more on board
That's true. You
together
guys
on
did,
stuff.
yeah.
Like like, we always have, there hasn't been like fighting about anything, like, you know what I mean? Like his therapies or treatments or medical or
Yeah.
schools, or I mean, we were co-conservators.
Okay.
That was never in question. We had, even though I had primary physical, we had joint, like, legal. So
That's
that part
great.
wasn't really, a thing. But yeah, I agree. And Dylan does certain things, and he's kind of like that everywhere, actually. Like if he goes even to my parents, or when he used to go to my
True.
grandparents and stuff, he kind of develops or
Huh?
different routines and schedules with wherever he's at, even down
Mhm.
to eating. Like,
Yep.
he'll eat something someplace he would never eat here. But I mean, that's kind of a good thing, because if anything, it maybe is bringing more variety into
Yeah.
his life and more flexibility.
That's a
So
good way to look at it.
yeah, I think once we got through the, you know,
Emotional part.
very big emotional hump, and just like through, the hardness, if like any divorce is, I don't know many people that don't get divorced, that it's not like no one likes it. It's not fun. But,
Yeah.
obviously, we got through it, and I think both kids have turned out to be great young men and are doing well. But yeah, it's really rough.
And
I
I
think go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say from like with the BCBA perspective on this, I'm
Mm-hmm.
both a parent, step parent, and a BCBA, been in Melanie's life and known her since she was about 14 or 15. Um, and the three major things that the law firm, the special needs lawyer said it, you've been saying it, is consistency, routines, and stability, right? And it doesn't mean they have to match exactly, which I learned the hard way. Like I thought if we were doing something a certain way, Melanie's other family should be doing a certain way. But I did learn the hard way that she adapted to it being different, like you've just
Mm-hmm.
described. And so I just think knowing that, because I was trying to be very rigid about it and saying it had to be the same across. And I realized now it doesn't. It just has to be same in that location. The expectation
Mm-hmm.
in each scenario is the same,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I think one really hard part about this situation at the time too, is that Dylan was not a good sleeper. And
Oh
so I
yeah.
think that made a lot of things escalate too, like for his anxiety and stuff. And then I had a really hard time with it. And so I couldn't sleep either. So I feel like the two of us, I don't know how Ethan could seem to sleep through anything, still does, but we were kind of like walking zombies, for like
You
six
guys were both,
months,
you were both
Yeah.
super sleep deprived.
So I think, I mean, for me, that was a huge part of it. And then Dylan also had, his whole life, like some underlying medical issues that we
Mhm.
have just figured out even just a
Yeah.
year ago. So I think a lot of, that adds a lot of stress to, maybe also contributors of, like, leading to divorce. There could be a whole checklist, but I mean, I think I'm trying to think of like a lot of my friends that are divorced that have children on the spectrum. And I,
Mhm.
I think that's like a big part of it too. I mean, it's stressful.
It's not
And
it's not fun sometimes. Like I
Mhm.
love Melanie. And she's one of the funnest people I ever met. But I was like, I had to actually sit down and Bill and he's like, can you do this?
Mhm.
And I was like, I don't know.
Mhm.
Because Melanie was really mean to me in the beginning. She's verbal. Um,
Mhm.
and it was fun when we were dating because, Bill and I would go off on our own, but then we'd start to incorporate and do things with her, and that was all fun. But then when we actually moved in together, to adjust. I had to adjust my routine to hers, which was hard to do as the woman in the house. Like I was trying to be the woman in the house for a
Mhm.
very long time. I had to adjust myself to Melanie and Bill's routine and not change it. And
Yeah.
because when I first went in and tried to change some things, Melanie did not respond well at all. She told me to F off. She told me it was a waste of
Mhm.
space. And so I had to go like, whoa, and like adapt my routine to theirs and make
Mhm.
slower changes. And I also, people have heard me talk about this a lot. I also had to learn to not make everything a teaching moment because I was driving Bill and Melanie crazy. I was constantly like, what about this? What about that? And
Mhm.
Bill was like, I can't do it all the time, Kelly. Like, I can't. You've got to give
Mhm.
me time. And that's how we developed, like, for our ABA people, it's called like non-contingent Sunday, which was really just like fun day Sunday, which was
Yeah.
regardless of anything that had happened during the week, we let it
Just
all go
yeah.
and had fun. And that's hard to do. If like Saturday night, and I had many a Saturday night when Melanie was brutal to me verbally, to get up on Sunday and just go and enjoy the day was really fucking hard. Excuse me.
Yeah. 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 Just suck it up.
Like,
Well, I mean, and think about it. I think part of it, because the age range too, that you were, starting in the situation, you're also, when it comes down to it, you're dealing with a teenage girl,
yeah.
regardless of it, if she's on the spectrum or not. I mean, my kids were like little kids, but like dealing with any teenager
Yep.
at all, you're going to get attitude typically.
Hmm. Yeah. And she was used to her dad's 100% attention.
Well, I think that's a big thing too that I always found.
I mean,
Like
she went
Dylan's
through that. Dylan had to learn
Dylan's
to
a
just,
total mama's boy. Yeah, it
mhm.
always has been, still is. But even like, even going through the divorce process, even but then even it's same thing, trying to date and then be in a relationship. Yeah, it's like it's been, a lot for people. It's definitely a lot to take. And I think probably Bill feels the same way, but for me, I gotta like sit back and think about like the
Mhm.
situation, especially if like the people that I dated and like my wonderful partner now of a very long time, like he never even knew anybody with
Yeah.
had never been exposed to anybody on the spectrum. And I remember so we were dating for a while, and then I decided that he's gonna meet everybody and meet the kids and the family. So I threw him straight in by inviting him to Mardi Gras for Autism
I remember
um,
that. Yep.
event. Yeah,
Yep.
on Valentine's Day, and it was like this is it. And here's my kids, here's everybody I know. You're gonna be a lot of people with autism today, my family, and like he didn't run. It
Yeah.
worked out. We've had, moments. It's not,
Yeah.
it hasn't been easy, especially if, I think the hardest thing for him was, and luckily things are mellow, kind of,
Yeah.
but like when Dylan would have tantrums and stuff, and if he would do anything to me, like I just think for anybody, especially if someone cares about you and loves you, and especially if you're a guy, that's probably really hard to like
Really,
take.
really
Yeah,
hard. You and I
yeah,
have talked about that.
yeah.
To watch your son attack you is going to be
Mm,
and it's not his blood. It's different. There's no
yeah.
question it's different when it's not your own child.
Mm,
Like I love my stepdaughters to death, but I can
mm,
tell it's different.
mm, yeah,
So I will just, we could go on forever about this. As
yeah.
for the BCBAs listening, I just wanted to throw out there that like working with families to help things to get established routines and consistency and stability, they don't have to be the same across the sites. They just have to be the same at that site was my personal biggest takeaway.
Mm-hmm,
And I'll just share, Jen, Mel and I have been through a lot, and I am 100% there for that woman. She's 33. And she had to have a nose surgery yesterday. It was in and out, simple procedure,
mm-hmm,
but she has never told me she loves me. She can't do it. And I think in her mind, she has all these black and white rules. She tells her mother
mm-hmm,
and father she loves them. She'll give me a heart emoji and she'll hug
mm-hmm.
me. I've even said when first time I ever said to her, I love you, she said no and walked away. So and I
Right.
started crying,
Yeah,
right? But she
yeah.
had to have a procedure yesterday. And I happened to see her in the morning, And she sent me a message and said, I'm really glad I got to see you before my procedure because I couldn't go. I was working. It made my procedure so much better knowing you were there for me, with a heart.
Aw,
I
I
started
love it.
crying.
Yeah, it's so great.
I know.
That's so cool.
Well, I think Bill
Yeah,
did
see?
cry.
Yeah, that's so great.
Yeah. So that's the good side of this all. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put some of the statistics in the session notes for people. Like I said, it's all over the place, but I'll put some of what we said in there. And at least we can close this out saying we're both happier and better off.
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.